Canada controls one of the most powerful geographic assets on Earth. Not a military base, not an alliance. A natural corridor, stretching thousands of kilometers, connecting the heart of North America straight to the Arctic Ocean. It drains nearly 1/5 of the country, runs through some of the most resource-rich territory on the continent, and ends at a coastline that major powers are paying more attention to every year. And yet, it rarely shows up in Canada's national conversation. This river is about 1,800 kilometers long, the longest river entirely within Canadian borders. Its watershed covers 1.8 million square kilometers, larger than Iran, bigger than Alaska, and it's often cited as creating the second largest Arctic delta in the world. And despite all that scale, there's still no continuous highway following its full length, no major port network built around it, and no single national strategy centered on it the way other countries build strategies around their great rivers. And yet Canada, at a national scale, has done relatively little to turn that advantage into infrastructure and long-term leverage. This is the Mackenzie River, the most powerful river in Canada that no one talks about. The Mackenzie River runs about 1,800 kilometers from Great Slave Lake to the Arctic Ocean, the longest river entirely within Canada. But the full system, including the Peace, Athabasca, and Liard rivers, stretches approximately 4,241 kilometers from British Columbia to the Beaufort Sea, often described as North America's second longest river system after the Mississippi, Missouri. Its basin is enormous, roughly 1.8 million square kilometers, about 20% of Canada's land area. That's larger than Iran, bigger than Alaska, roughly comparable to Mexico. The river delivers vast fresh water to the Arctic. Its delta covers about 13,000 square kilometers, often cited as the Arctic's second largest after Russia's Lena River Delta. On paper, this is the kind of geography that usually builds nations. But the Mackenzie does not function as a corridor the way similar rivers do elsewhere. Consider the Rhine. Its basin is only about 1/10 the size of the Mackenzie's, yet it powers Europe's industrial engine: dense cities, deep ports, integrated canals. The Mississippi system drains about 3.2 million square kilometers and anchors America's agricultural and industrial core by linking the interior to warm water global routes. By contrast, the Mackenzie has very little large-scale development along its length. Inuvik, roughly 3,200 people, is the largest community on the main stem. Fort Simpson is around 1,200. Norman Wells is under 1,000. Along the entire course from Great Slave Lake to the Beaufort Sea, the total population is likely under 10,000, fewer than a single neighborhood in Toronto. There are no major port cities, no deep-water Arctic gateway fed by rail, and relatively little commercial cargo moving compared to its scale. For a river system this size, in a G7 country, that's extraordinary. But here's why this story is interesting. Canada didn't forget how to build corridors. It just built them in the opposite direction. Roughly 3/4 of Canadians live within approximately 160 kilometers of the US border. The economic core, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, is southern. So are the highways, railways, pipelines, and deep-water ports. The national spine was engineered east-west along the southern, toward the United States and the Atlantic and Pacific, not northward toward the Arctic. Think about the contrast. The St. Lawrence Seaway opened in 1959. It connects the Great Lakes to the Atlantic and handles roughly 35 to 40 million tons of cargo annually. Canada spent billions to create that engineered shipping corridor. But it invested almost nothing, at least in comparable nation-building terms, to develop the natural corridor it already had to the Arctic. So the real question isn't, why is the Mackenzie quiet? It's, why did Canada choose not to build around it? The Mackenzie is not just a river. It is a drainage corridor that ties together hydrocarbons, critical minerals, forests, and hydropower into a single continental-scale system, which is connected to a region that's becoming more contested every year. Let's start with what the Mackenzie River actually drains. Oil and gas. The Peace Athabasca subbasin drains northern Alberta, including the Athabasca oil sands, one of the world's largest hydrocarbon reserves, widely cited at approximately 166 billion barrels of recoverable oil. The Mackenzie Delta itself lies atop significant natural gas deposits. In the 2000s, the Mackenzie Gas Project advanced to move Arctic gas south along the valley. Then there's Norman Wells, a producing oil field since 1920 that sits directly on the river, plus additional deposits that remain constrained by infrastructure. Now add critical minerals. The Northwest Territories contain major deposits of gold, diamonds, and tungsten, as well as rare earth-related prospects, materials essential to high-tech manufacturing, defense, and energy transitions. The territory is already one of Canada's key diamond producers. But the same question keeps coming up. How do you move heavy material out of remote locations cheaply and reliably? Add forests and hydropower. The basin is blanketed in boreal forest. The Slave River, feeding into Great Slave Lake, and then the Mackenzie, features major rapids and elevation drops, sites that in other latitudes would have been dammed into regional grid anchors. In most countries, a river that integrates hydrocarbons, critical minerals, timber, and hydropower becomes the backbone around which logistics and industry accumulate. That's what the Mississippi does for the United States. Link resource belts to a predictable, year-round warm water outlet. Here is the structural difference that shaped Canada's choices. The Mackenzie's outlet is the Arctic Ocean, which, for most of modern history, wasn't a highway. It was a wall. But that one detail, the Arctic outlet, is exactly why this story is changing. Because the Arctic isn't staying frozen. And when the Arctic becomes accessible, the Mackenzie stops being a northern river. It becomes something else. For most of the modern era, the Arctic Ocean was frozen solid for most of the year. Not a trade route, not a reliable resource zone, mostly a barrier. Today, it is a seasonal corridor and a geopolitical front line. Arctic sea ice is disappearing. In the 1980s, the Arctic ice cap covered approximately 7 million square kilometers at its summer minimum. By the 2020s, that had shrunk to approximately 4 million square kilometers. Some projections suggest the Arctic could be ice-free in summer by the 2030s or 2040s. That shift has practical consequences. As the ice pulls back, impossible routes start looking usable. The Northern Sea route along Russia's coast can cut Europe to Asia shipping time by as much as 40% versus the Suez route, depending on conditions and routing. The Northwest Passage through Canada's Arctic archipelago offers similar strategic potential. And major powers are positioning themselves accordingly. Russia is investing heavily in Arctic infrastructure, ports, bases, and a large icebreaker fleet. It's treating the Northern Sea route like a national project. China has no Arctic coastline, yet it calls itself a near-Arctic state. It's building icebreakers, funding research, investing in northern resource projects, and pushing what it calls the Polar Silk Road. The United States is increasing Arctic attention through Alaska, expanding capability after decades of underinvestment. So yes, Russia is hardening. China is spending. The US is waking up. And Canada is not investing as much? Canada has something none of these countries can replicate quickly: a natural corridor from the interior to the Western Arctic. The Mackenzie River offers the kind of direct access China is spending billions trying to buy. But there's a catch that decides everything. Access only matters if you build the infrastructure to use it. And right now, Canada's ability to use that corridor at national strategic scale is limited. Which brings us to the hard part of the story. Throughout the 20th century, there were multiple ambitious plans to develop the Mackenzie River corridor. Big ones, over and over. Many failed, stalled, or fell far short of expectation for the same brutal reasons. First, ice. The Mackenzie freezes for 6 to 7 months each year, often locking up in October or November and breaking up in May or June. You can't build a high-volume shipping economy around a waterway that's reliably shut down half the year. Second, permafrost. Much of the land along the corridor is permanently frozen ground. Build on it, and the ground shifts as it freezes and thaws. Roads buckle, foundations crack, pipelines require expensive, specialized engineering. The Inuvik-Tuktoyaktuk Highway, completed in 2017, is a perfect example. About 140 kilometers of road for roughly $300 million, over $2 million per kilometer, often described as around 10 times the cost of Southern highway construction. Third, distance and cost. The Mackenzie River flows through some of the most remote territory in Canada. Norman Wells is still hundreds of kilometers beyond the end of the all-season Mackenzie Valley Highway at Wrigley, relying on seasonal winter roads and air links. Inuvik is more than 1,000 kilometers from Yellowknife, the nearest city of any scale. Construction seasons are short. Labor is expensive because workers are flown in. Materials travel enormous distances. If you want a perfect example of how fast northern economies can collapse, look at the Canal project during World War II. In 1942, the US and Canada launched an emergency wartime pipeline from Norman Wells to Whitehorse, about 900 kilometers. It employed over 25,000 workers at its peak and cost roughly $134 million in 1940s dollars, often converted to around $2 billion today, depending on the method. It was completed in 1944, and it operated for about a year. Then it was shut down because it was cheaper to ship oil by tanker than to maintain a remote pipeline. Equipment was abandoned along the route, some of it still visible today. Fourth, alternative routes. For most of Canada's history, it was simply cheaper to send resources south into existing markets than to build new northern systems. Oil could be piped to refineries in the US. Minerals could be flown out or trucked to southern rail. Grain shipped through established Great Lakes and Pacific ports, so the North stayed optional. Fifth, political complexity. In the 1970s, the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline Inquiry, led by Justice Thomas Berger, became one of the most exhaustive reviews of northern development in Canadian history. The final report in 1977 recommended a 10-year moratorium. The pipeline was never built. The Mackenzie Gas Project tried again decades later. The $16.2 billion project received regulatory approval in 2011, but the US shale gas boom crushed prices, and the project was shelved in 2017. So yes, ice, permafrost, distance, cost, alternatives, politics. A stack of barriers that kept winning. But here's what changed. For most of the 20th century, the Mackenzie's Arctic outlet had limited strategic value because the Arctic itself had limited strategic value. That is no longer true, because in the Arctic, presence matters. Canada claims the Northwest Passage as internal waters. The US and others argue it's an international strait. That debate isn't settled by speeches. It's strengthened by capability, monitoring, search and rescue, environmental response, and consistent operations. Because as traffic rises, the risks rise with it. If a ship gets trapped or damaged, Canada needs the logistics to reach it fast. If there's a spill in the Beaufort Sea, Canada needs the equipment and staging points to contain it. If foreign vessels operate in waters Canada claims, Canada needs a reliable way to watch, respond, and enforce. And this is where the Mackenzie becomes strategic. It's Canada's main corridor into the Western Arctic. The communities along it, Inuvik, Tuktoyaktuk, Norman Wells, Fort Simpson, are Canada's presence on that flank. But the presence is thin. Inuvik is about 3,200 people. Tuktoyaktuk about 900. Year-round road access to the Arctic coast only arrived in 2017. Compare this to Russia's Arctic presence. Russia has multiple cities above the Arctic Circle with populations over 100,000. Murmansk has about 300,000 people. Norilsk has about 175,000. Russia has extensive military infrastructure, ports, and year-round shipping operations. Or compare it to Alaska, where the United States maintains a significant military presence, including major bases and multiple radar and early warning installations. Canada runs Arctic operations and icebreaker patrols, but infrastructure limits what presence can realistically mean. So the uncomfortable truth is this: Canada already has a corridor most countries would kill for. But without ports, roads, facilities, and sustained investment, it remains what it's always been: a geographic advantage that Canada hasn't converted into long-term leverage. Canada controls one of the most powerful geographic assets on Earth, a natural corridor connecting resource-rich territory directly to the Arctic Ocean. For over a century, Canada chose not to develop it. The Arctic was frozen. There were no markets, so Canada built south. But the world has changed. The Arctic is opening. Russia is militarizing. China is investing billions. The United States is expanding its presence. Every attempt to develop the Mackenzie River has failed. The Canal project, abandoned after 13 months. The Mackenzie Valley Pipeline was never built. The Mackenzie Gas Project, shelved. But those failures were measured against 20th century economics, when the Arctic had far less strategic value. The calculation is different now, because the Mackenzie River drains 20% of Canada's land area, creates the second largest Arctic delta in the world, and connects Canada's interior directly to the Arctic Ocean, and almost nobody talks about it. So the real question isn't whether Canada has an Arctic corridor, it's whether Canada will finally decide to use it. Should Canada invest billions to turn the Mackenzie into strategic infrastructure, or keep treating it like a river that's too far away to matter? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this changed how you see Canada's Arctic strategy, hit like and subscribe. More stories about how geography shapes power are coming up.